Welcome to the Treasury Update Podcast, Coffee Break Sessions, presented by Strategic Treasurer, the show where we cover foundational topics and core Treasury issues in about the same amount of time it takes you to drink your cup of coffee. I'll be your host, Jonathan, Media Production Specialist here at Strategic Treasurer, so sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. We are back with another coffee break session to talk about authentication. Today, I'm here with Christin Cifaldi, Director of Product Development and Analytics at Strategic Treasurer. Welcome back to the show.
It's great to be back, John.
So let's just start off and jump right into it. What is authentication?
Authentication is the process of verifying the identity or legitimacy of a user, device, or message in the digital ecosystem. Authentication helps ensure that only authorized parties can access, modify, or transmit sensitive data. Authentication also prevents impersonation, spoofing, tampering, or replay attacks.
Okay, and I know a lot of the times this can feel like there's multiple authentication pieces and it can feel unnecessary and like an extra hassle. Why is it important to stay up to date with authentication?
Authentication is important and should never be ignored or turned off if it's available for various reasons. You want to safeguard personal information, such as bank accounts, medical records, social media profiles. You want to comply with legal or regulatory requirements, such as HIPAA, GDPR, or PCI DSS that mandate data protection and privacy standards for certain industries or domains. To maintain the integrity and reputation of organizations, such as businesses, governments, or nonprofits that rely on data to provide services, make decisions, or communicate with stakeholders. A lack of authentication or weak authentication can lead to major data breaches that cause significant losses and damages. For example, in 2013, Target suffered a data breach that exposed the personal and financial information of 70 million customers. Attackers gained access to Target's network by stealing the credentials of a third-party vendor that had remote access to Target's network. The breach cost Target $162 million in legal fees, settlements, and remediation costs, as well as lost revenue and customer trust.
It seems like a lot of people are moving towards dual-factor authentication. Is dual-factor authentication enough, or are there still risks with it?
Currently, dual-factor authentication is mostly enough to prevent cybersecurity attacks. Obviously, the criminals constantly are evolving as technology evolves. And at some point we might need to add, bio-identification, just like how your phone looks at your face, or as a third step.
Fingerprint scan.
Yep, fingerprint scans. But right now, if you turn on your multi-factor authentication, your work information and your bank account information is going to be pretty secure.
There was some things about passwords leaked in a data leak. And I was like, okay, well, they have my password, but if it's still dual authentication, they still have to jump into it's not even with my phone, it's with another account that assigns a device. They'd have to be able to control the device to get into it. So even if they have the password, they don't have access.
Yep, correct. That's why multi-factor authentication is so secure. However, if you do have a hint or proof that your passwords have been stolen, you should go in and change them immediately, even if you have the MFA on there.
Do you have any examples of different methods of authentication?
Yes. So there's password-based authentication, where you enter a secret and unique password that matches one stored in the system. This is most widely used, but is also the most vulnerable type of authentication. Passwords are easily guessed, stolen, or cracked, and it's only one layer of authentication. Another example is biometric authentication, where your user provides physical or behavioral traits such as fingerprint, face, voice, or iris scan that is matched to a stored template. This type of authentication is more secure than a password, and it's also more convenient, but it's more expensive and prone to errors or spoofing. And again, if you just have on our phones, most of us just have the biometric authentication, the Face ID, that is still just one layer of authentication. The third example is token-based authentication, where a user possesses a physical or digital token, such as a smart card, RFID tag, or one-time password generator, such as an authentication app that proves your identity. This type of authentication adds the extra layer of security to password-based authentication, but does require the user to carry or access the token. So I feel like this is most commonly seen in workplace environments, especially in the treasury world. I'm sure we all have bank tokens locked in a drawer, hopefully locked in a drawer, and you're used to having that token, the code displayed on it, along with your user ID and your password. And this can also be used on certain apps. I know Zoom has a token-based authentication option that you can turn on, which I do recommend people go out and do that. And that's through an authentication app. It's either Google or Microsoft's authentication app that you can tune into Zoom with.
We had that at the last place I worked, was the physical tokens. And we had our door scan cards to get in and out of the buildings and through different areas, and then the physical token to plug into the computer to access. And so whenever someone forgot their stuff, it was horrible. We could get a door pass, but like you'd have to totally change your role that day because you couldn't access anything.
Yep. Not as convenient, but more secure.
Yeah. It even keeps you out. Any other examples?
Yet there's one last, which is certificate-based authentication, where a user presents a digital certificate, such as an SSL or TLS certificate, that contains a public key and is signed by a trusted authority. And this type of authentication is used to establish secure and encrypted connections between devices or servers, but also requires the user to obtain and manage the certificate. So this is if you're using a VPN to, remotely work, you're going to be using certificate-based authentication most likely, and oftentimes token-based authentication for that as well.
Cool. Well, thanks. Any final thoughts or best practices you want to share?
Best practices, can't stress enough that you have some sort of multi-factor authentication turned on, everything personal and work where it is possible, just to protect your information. And then I guess also be careful and don't lose your your tokens, or you might get locked out of work.
That's true. Well, thanks for sharing your thoughts. And to our listeners, remember to tune back every first and third Thursday of the month for another coffee break session.
This podcast is provided for informational purposes only, and statements made by Strategic Treasurer LLC on this podcast are not intended as legal, business, consulting, or tax advice. For more information, visit and bookmark strategictreasurer.com.